Daniel Whitmore had been in real estate long enough to know when a house wanted to be sold. Most homes hummed with a quiet kind of life. Years of families, love, arguments, celebrations, all soaked into the walls. A good house wanted to be lived in. This house, it had been waiting. He stood on the grand porch of 142 Blackwood Lane, forcing a confident smile as he watched the young couple inspect the property. The house had been listed for decades, passed from agency to agency like a cursed relic. The price had been slashed, and still no one bid, until Mark and Lisa Caldwell. Lisa ran her fingers along the carved wooden banister as she stepped inside. "It's beautiful." Mark whistled, eyes scanning the high ceilings, the sprawling staircase. "And in our budget?" Daniel laughed, the well-practiced chuckle of a man dodging an ugly truth. "You won't find a deal like this anywhere else." The house seemed perfect. Dark wood floors gleamed, despite the fact that no one had lived here in decades. Sunlight filtered through massive bay windows, illuminating dust-free furniture that shouldn't have been there. The place was staged as if it had never been empty. If they noticed, they didn't mention it. Lisa beamed. "We'll take it." Daniel felt the words settle in the air, thick and final. A breeze moved through the foyer, a strange, low, creaking sound drifting from above, like the house exhaling. Lisa frowned. "Did you hear that?" Daniel cleared his throat. "Just the house settling." He moved them quickly through the paperwork, hands steady despite the cold sweat on his back. He had never sold this house before. He knew that. But something about the moment felt familiar. When Mark scrawled his final signature, the floor beneath them gave the faintest vibration. Not a tremor, not a creak, a pulse. Lisa shivered. "Weird." Daniel forced a smile. "Congratulations, it's all yours." The couple grinned, excited, naive. Daniel walked to his car, keeping his pace even, ignoring the urge to look back. When he pulled out of the driveway, he finally allowed himself to check the rearview mirror. The house stood silent. The windows, dark now, almost black, watched him leave. And though it was impossible, Daniel could have sworn it was bigger than it had been that morning. The first week in the house was a dream. Lisa spent her days decorating, rearranging furniture, and planning future renovations. Mark worked from his upstairs office, thrilled by the quiet. At night, they curled up by the fireplace, drinking wine and basking in their new home. Then, on the 7th day, Lisa found the door. She had walked the upstairs hallway countless times. It wasn't particularly large, 4 doors in total, leading to the master bedroom, a guest room, the office, and a bathroom. But today there was a 5th, a door she knew hadn't been there before. Lisa stopped mid-stride, her heart knocking against her ribs. It was just a simple white door matching the others perfectly, but she knew. "Mark?" Her voice was too loud in the empty house. Footsteps thumped against the stairs as Mark appeared beside her, still holding his coffee. "What's wrong?" Lisa pointed. "That door, that wasn't there yesterday." Mark frowned. "What are you talking about? It's just a closet, right?" Lisa reached for the brass knob. It was ice cold. She twisted it slowly. The door groaned open, releasing a breath of stale, rotting air. Inside was a child's bedroom. Dust coated every surface. A tiny 4-poster bed stood against the wall, its canopy sagging with age. A toy chest sat half open, stuffed animals spilling out like forgotten corpses. A wooden rocking horse rested near the window, frozen mid-motion, its painted eyes cracked and hollow. Lisa stepped inside. The floorboards creaked beneath her weight, releasing the scent of mildew and something sour. Mark coughed. "God, it stinks in here." Lisa moved toward the wall, running her fingers along the faded wallpaper. Tiny sailboats decorated the surface, but where the paper peeled, something was underneath, a darker layer. She hooked a fingernail beneath the curling edge and tugged. The wallpaper peeled away in long, dry strips, revealing something scratched into the wood beneath. Fingernail marks, deep, jagged, desperate. Lisa staggered back. Someone was trapped in here. Mark swallowed hard, scanning the room with fresh unease. The air felt thicker now, wrong. He grabbed her hand. "Let's go, maybe the previous owners—" A soft creak cut him off. Both turned. The rocking horse had moved, not much, just a few inches forward. But it had moved. The door slammed shut behind them. The house sighed. Lisa refused to sleep in the house that night. They checked the room again, hoping to find some logical explanation. Maybe the door had been there all along. Maybe they just hadn't noticed it. Maybe the rocking horse had shifted because of uneven floors, but deep down, they both knew the truth. It hadn't been there before, and now it was. Mark double-checked the locks, even propped a chair under the front door handle for good measure. Lisa lay stiff in bed beside him, fingers clenched in the sheets, listening, waiting. The house did not settle that night. It breathed. The next morning, Mark woke to find Lisa already up, pacing the hallway. "I think I'm losing my mind," she muttered. Mark rubbed the sleep from his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Lisa gestured toward the bathroom door. "It was on the left side of the hallway, right? It's always been on the left." Mark blinked. The bathroom wasn't on the left anymore. It was on the right. His stomach tightened. "Maybe we just remembered wrong." Lisa shook her head. No way. I've walked this hall 100 times. The bathroom has never been on that side." They tested it, opening the door. Sure enough, it was their bathroom. Same white tile, same shower curtain. But it was wrong. A sinking unease spread through Mark's chest. He tried to shake it off. It's got to be some weird trick of the brain. Stress, maybe. Lisa didn't respond. She was staring down the hallway, her face pale. The hallway was longer. Mark could have sworn it only had 4 doors yesterday. But now, there were 6. At the very end, a 7th. Another door that hadn't been there before. Lisa grabbed his arm. "Mark, I want to leave today." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I'll call the realtor." Daniel picked up on the first ring. "Daniel, something's wrong with this house," Mark said. A long silence, then a forced chuckle. "I get it. Old houses can be spooky, but trust me, nothing's—" "No. Listen, rooms are moving, doors are appearing. My wife is terrified, and I—" Daniel hesitated, then, in a much lower voice, "I'll come by tomorrow. We can talk then." Mark started to protest, but Daniel had already hung up. Behind him, Lisa let out a shaky breath. Mark turned back to the hallway. The 7th door was slightly open now, and something was watching. The couple ran to their bedroom, locked the door, and went to bed, terrified. Mark woke to silence. At first, it seemed normal. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the street lamp outside. He reached across the bed instinctively, searching for the warmth of Lisa's body. But her side of the bed was cold. Mark sat up. "Lisa?" No answer. He glanced at the nightstand. Her phone was still there, the screen dark. The digital clock read 3:12 a.m. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, heart hammering against his ribs. The air felt thicker, heavier. He hadn't noticed it before, but the house smelled different now, a strange, damp scent like rotting wood left out in the rain. He moved through the darkened hallway, checking the bathroom. Empty. The guest room. Empty. The kitchen. No sign of her. By the time he reached the front door, his hands were shaking. He grabbed the handle and twisted. It didn't move. Mark frowned and pulled harder. The lock was undone. The deadbolt wasn't engaged, but the door felt like it had been welded shut. He turned to the nearest window and tried to pry it open. It wouldn't budge. He pounded on the glass, but it barely rattled. A chill ran down his spine. The house wouldn't let him leave. Somewhere upstairs, a soft creak echoed through the halls. Mark spun around, his breath catching in his throat. "Lisa?" Silence. Then another creak. He grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and rushed back toward the stairs. His mind raced with rationalizations. Maybe she had woken up and wandered into one of those weird new rooms. Maybe she had heard a noise and gone to investigate. But then, why was her phone still by the bed? He reached the top of the stairs. The hallway stretched before him, impossibly long. The 7th door was wide open now. A black void yawned beyond it. Mark swallowed the lump in his throat. He took a cautious step forward, shining the flashlight inside. The beam barely penetrated the darkness, as if the light itself was being swallowed. Then, deep within the shadows, something moved. A whisper of fabric, a shifting shape. A hand slammed against the inside of the wall. Mark stumbled back, his pulse roaring in his ears. The fingers were long and too thin. The nails scraped against the wood, slow and deliberate. A dry voice rasped from the void. "Help me!" It was Lisa's voice, but it wasn't Lisa. Mark bolted. He ran back down the stairs, nearly tripping over his own feet. The walls seemed closer now, squeezing inward. The air was thick, humid, alive. He reached for his phone, hands trembling, and dialed Daniel's number. It rang once, twice, then, "Hello?" Twice. "Daniel," Mark gasped. "Lisa's gone. The house won't let me out. Doors are moving, rooms are appearing. I heard her voice inside the walls." Silence. He looked at the phone. No service. Daniel Whitmore sat at his desk, flipping through the property records for 142 Blackwood Lane. Mark Caldwell had called him in a panic, his voice shaking, talking about moving rooms, missing doors, and a wife that had vanished into thin air. He had tried calling him back, but it came busy. Daniel had tried to brush it off, but now, as he stared at the records in front of him, his gut twisted. He had sold this house before, not once, not twice, dozens of times. The pages in his file were yellowed and brittle. Some of the sales he didn't even remember making. Yet there were his initials, his signature, the same agreements made over and over. He reached for his computer, pulling up the most recent listing. His stomach clenched. The square footage had increased, not by a little, not by an extra room or a minor expansion. The house was growing. Daniel flipped through the older listings, his breath quickening. The house had started at 2,100 square feet. Now it was over 4,500. But that was impossible. There had been no renovations, no contractors. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone. He dialed Mark's number again. It rang once, then twice. "Daniel," Mark's voice came through, breathless, frantic. "Lisa's gone. I woke up and she's just gone." Daniel clenched his jaw. "Mark, listen to me carefully. Don't go near the new rooms. Don't open any doors that weren't there before." Mark hesitated. "You knew? You knew something was wrong with this place and you sold it to us anyway?" Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. "I didn't," he exhaled. "I don't remember selling this house before. I should, but I don't. The house erases things." Silence. Then Mark whispered, "It won't let me leave." Daniel's blood ran cold. Mark's voice shook. I tried the doors, the windows. Nothing opens. The walls are making noises. I keep hearing her voice inside them, but I don't think it's really her." Daniel grabbed his coat. "I'm coming there now." "No," Mark's voice dropped to a whisper. "Come in the morning, not at night. It's different at night. I can't even call the cops. I have no cell phone service in the house, yet yours is the only call that came through." Daniel's mouth went dry. He stared at the newest listing, his own face smiling in the promotional photos. He didn't remember taking them. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles ached. Daniel's words churned in his head. The house erases things. The phrase felt too big, too impossible. But everything about this place was impossible. Lisa was gone, and the house wasn't letting him leave. He swallowed hard and forced himself to move. He had to do something, anything. He tried the doors again, one by one, yanking on the handles until his hands hurt. The front door didn't budge. The kitchen window wouldn't even rattle in its frame. The house had sealed itself shut. He grabbed a chair from the dining room and swung it at the glass. Crack! The wood frame splintered, but the glass didn't break. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the house. Then from the walls, a muffled voice. Mark froze. It was Lisa's voice. "Mark?" He spun, heart hammering. The sound was coming from inside the walls. Mark pressed his ear against the drywall. A whisper, faint, garbled. "Mark, please." He reeled back. His breathing turned shallow. He knew Lisa's voice. Every inflection, every little rise and fall in tone. But this, it was close, but not quite right. Then another voice joined hers. A man's, fainter, more desperate. "Help me." Mark's stomach lurched. There was someone else inside the walls. No, there were many. The whispers layered over each other, multiplying. Some sobbed, some begged. Others only repeated his name. "Mark, Mark, Mark." A soft knock sounded from the drywall. Mark's skin crawled. The wallpaper bulged. A human handprint pressed against it from the inside, fingers stretching beneath the surface. The plaster bent outward like skin over bone. Mark staggered back, pulse hammering. "Please," Lisa's voice whimpered through the wall. "Mark, it hurts. Please help me." His body screamed to run, but his hand moved on its own. He reached forward. A blackened fingernail burst through the wall. Mark jerked back just as a hand punched through the plaster, clawing wildly. It was not Lisa's hand. The fingers were too long, too thin. The skin was gray, sickly, damp. The moment it touched the air, it shriveled. The skin hissed and curled, as if burned. It withdrew back into the wall with a wet squelch. Mark stood there shaking. A new voice rasped from the hole. Not Lisa, not a person at all. Something breathing, something waiting. And then the floor opened beneath him and Mark fell into the dark. Mark hit the floor hard. For a moment, all he could do was lay there gasping. His fingers dug into the wood beneath him, his mind scrambling to make sense of what had happened. The house had opened up beneath him, swallowed him. He pushed himself up, wincing. The room was wrong. It wasn't the hallway. It wasn't anywhere he recognized. The walls were too close together, the ceiling too low. The floor was no longer polished hardwood. It was soft, almost fleshy. Mark swallowed hard. The air was thick, humid. The smell of rot and damp wood filled his lungs, and then he felt it, a ripple beneath his palm. His breath hitched as he stared at the floor. It pulsed. The wood-like surface moved beneath his fingers, flexing like muscle. A deep, slow groan rumbled through the walls. Mark scrambled to his feet. The hallway ahead twisted, stretching longer, the door at the far end pulling away as if retreating. The house was shifting, shrinking rooms, narrowing spaces. It was closing in. Mark turned to run, but the walls shuddered. Something bulged beneath the wallpaper. A slow, wet movement. The plaster split. A blackened hand punched through, fingers twitching. Mark staggered back. Another hand burst through the opposite wall, then another, and another. Dozens of rotting hands clawed their way out of the wallpaper, their fingers stretching toward him. Some of them were small, childlike. Others too long, too thin, their nails ragged and curling. A choked sob crawled up Mark's throat. The hands weren't just reaching, they were pulling the walls closer. The hallway was shrinking. Mark spun and ran, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The floor softened beneath his steps, flexing under his weight. The walls breathed, contracting like lungs. The groan came again, longer this time, deeper. Mark didn't need to understand what was happening. He already knew. The house was digesting him. His foot caught on something. He fell, landing hard on something wet. Mark looked down and saw it. The floor had opened up, and beneath it, stretching into infinite darkness, was something alive, something that had been waiting. And then the walls slammed inward. Daniel parked outside 142 Blackwood Lane and immediately knew something was wrong. The house looked bigger. It was subtle. An extra window that hadn't been there before, a new angle to the roof that seemed wrong. But Daniel had been selling houses for over a decade, and he noticed details. He stepped out of the car, hands clammy. He didn't want to be here. He had sold this house before, too many times. Each time the owners vanished. Each time the house grew. And now Mark and Lisa were next. Daniel reached the porch, hesitating. The front door was ajar. Something felt different. Off. He pushed the door open. The inside was dark. Not normal dark. Thick dark, like stepping into a closed mouth. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, illuminating the grand hallway. Something was wrong. The house was bigger than before. He had walked this hallway a dozen times, but now it stretched too far. The ceiling loomed higher. The staircase curved at an angle it hadn't before. Daniel's pulse quickened. Then he saw them. People. At first he thought they were portraits. Dozens of faces embedded in the wallpaper, their eyes open, darting wildly. Some had their mouths frozen in silent screams. Others had arms half pulled into the walls, fingers twitching. Daniel staggered back. His breath hitched as he recognized one of the faces, Lisa. Her mouth stretched wide, her eyes wet with terror. She blinked, then they all blinked. Daniel clamped a hand over his mouth, his legs trembled. This was what happened to the missing owners. The house didn't just take them, it absorbed them. A slow, shuddering creak filled the air. Daniel turned. A door at the end of the hallway swung open on its own. Something moved in the darkness beyond it. Then all at once every trapped face turned toward him. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. And then they started whispering. Daniel's breath came in short, ragged gasps. The whispers slithered through the air, dozens of voices overlapping, pleading, warning. The trapped faces in the walls twitched, their mouths moving in silent horror. Then footsteps, heavy, slow, coming from the darkness beyond the open door. Daniel spun around. The door he had entered through was gone. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He was trapped. Something shifted in the shadows. The air grew thick, suffocating. The wood beneath his feet groaned. The walls bulged as if something enormous was pressing against them from the inside. A long, low exhale rippled through the space. Then, a breath. The house was breathing. Daniel turned and ran. The hallway twisted as he moved, the floor rippling like muscle, shifting to keep him inside. He reached for a door, but it melted into the wall before his fingers could touch it. Another door appeared ahead. No choice. Daniel lunged forward, yanking it open. Beyond it, stairs stretched downward. The angle was wrong. The descent was too steep, the steps curving in on themselves like a spiral leading into something deeper than the foundation should allow. But the whispers were growing louder, and behind him, something was coming. Daniel took the stairs two at a time, the air turning hotter as he descended. The walls trembled, vibrating with movement. The stairs had no end. They stretched deeper and deeper, twisting in ways that made no architectural sense. And then the light changed. A faint glow pulsed from below, red and sickly. The air grew damp, the scent of rotting wood and decay thick in Daniel's throat. The stairs ended abruptly. Daniel stumbled forward into a massive open space. It wasn't a basement. It wasn't anything that should exist beneath a house. The floor beneath him was soft, wet. The walls were not walls. They were pulsing, veined, alive. Something moved in the dark, a slow, wet shifting. Daniel's flashlight flickered. The glow illuminated something vast, a mass of fused bodies, half-formed, stretched and twisted together. Arms merged into the floor, heads melted into the walls, and at the center of it all, something huge and waiting. Daniel's stomach dropped. Then it opened its eye. 3 days later, the for sale sign was back on the lawn. The house looked the same, untouched, clean, perfect. Inside, Daniel stood in the grand foyer adjusting his tie. His face was paler now, thinner. His once sharp blue eyes were dull, hollow, but he smiled. It was too wide. He turned as a couple entered, their faces bright with excitement. "You must be the Whitmores," Daniel said smoothly. His voice was even, practiced, warm. "Welcome to 142 Blackwood Lane." The husband, a tall man in his early 30s, took in the sprawling staircase, the polished wood. "Wow," he breathed. "I can't believe this place is still available." His wife nodded eagerly. "It's beautiful." Daniel's smile didn't waver. "It's been waiting for the right owners." The couple laughed, unaware of how true that was. He led them through the house, his footsteps light, almost rehearsed. The rooms were exactly as they should be, elegant, inviting, warm. The air smelled of fresh wood and vanilla, as if someone had just finished staging it. There were no strange doors, no moving walls, not yet. The couple fell in love instantly. By the time they reached the kitchen, the husband turned, grinning. "We'll take it." Daniel's heart barely beat anymore, but he still felt it. The house exhaling, settling. It was satisfied. They signed the papers. The wife shivered slightly as she handed over the last form. "Did you hear that?" Daniel's smile never faded. Just the house settling. Outside, the sky darkened. The trees stood too still. The windows looked darker now, watching. The couple stepped over the threshold into their new home, and as the front door swung shut behind them, the house got bigger. Hey guys, if you like my videos, please like and subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it. Thanks.